Good evening, everyone. It's now 6:34, and I call to order the regular meeting of the Victoria City Council. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item on our agenda this evening is announcements. All meetings of the City Council are open to the public and held in the council chambers at City Hall unless otherwise noted. If you're interested in speaking at a council meeting, we encourage you to contact our city clerk for more information. In other announcements, Night to Unite is right around the corner. Organize a party with your neighbors for the upcoming Night to Unite on August 1st. Register your party with the City of Victoria and reserve a visit from firefighters, sheriff's deputies, and members of the City Council and staff. Visits are guaranteed up to 20 parties, and there are 4 openings left. So learn more about Night to Unite and schedule a visit by visiting the city's website. And lastly, a reminder that the city offices will be closed Tuesday, July 4th for the holiday. Offices will reopen the following business day. I hope everyone has a fun and safe 4th of July. There are no proclamations this evening, so our next order of business is to adopt the final agenda. Council, can I get a motion to adopt the final agenda?
Motion to adopt the final agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to our next item, which is the open forum. Open forum is an opportunity for anyone to address the council on an item that is not on the agenda and not an application form that will be coming to the council at a future date. Please don't expect any action from the council this evening regarding your comments. Council members may ask clarifying questions, but open forum is not intended to be a discussion. There has been no one who has registered to speak in advance, but if there's anyone in the audience who would like to address the council this evening, please step forward. Seeing no one, we'll move on to the next item, which is the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are routine, administrative, and do not require deliberation or are housekeeping items required by law. Consent agenda items are approved with one vote unless someone requests an item to be considered separately. Ms. Hardy, is there any, does staff wish to pull any consent agenda items for separate discussion and vote?
None from staff, Madam Mayor.
Any members of the council wishing to pull anything from consent agenda? Any member of the audience who wishes to pull anything from the consent agenda? All right, seeing no one, council, may I have a motion to accept the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to accept the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to our regular agenda. Our first item on the this evening, item 6.1, is the Roars Mixed Use Development Preliminary Plat Review. Presenting this evening is our consulting city planner, Nathan First. Welcome, Mr. First, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. So I am presenting the preliminary plat PUD, shoreline CUP, and shoreline variance requests from Roars Companies. So as mentioned, those are our requests that are under review this evening. So as a reminder, I always include this slide, but this is the preliminary plat process where we really do the bulk of our detailed review for projects. This one is no different. I'll try and be brief with the presentation, but there's a lot of content to go through. So
It's all right. It's a big project. We need to know about it.
yeah, so as said, major entitlements are granted at this stage of the process. Similarly with preliminary plat, the PUD process, we're really focusing on details at this point, trying to make sure that we're identifying all the deviations needed as to support developer's request. So getting to it, this is the location on the screen of the subject property. This has been referred to by staff as the Leitner property. What it is 7 existing parcels, which would be aggregated by the developer, including some portions of unused public right-of-way. In total, we're looking at something just over 2.6 acres. The uses proposed for this site are 125 apartment dwelling units, 8,700 square feet of commercial space, and a total of 258 parking spaces to support the uses on the site. So I'm sure most are familiar with the existing conditions here. One thing to note is the location of this site at the intersection of Rose Street and Highway 5. You've also got the regional LRT mixed-use corridor, which runs east to west across the north side of the site. There's pretty significant grade changes as you go north on the site, getting down to the trail. There are wooded areas mostly along the trail. A couple existing structures on the property which would be demolished by the development. Worth noting, environmental remediation review has been in process. I know the developer is in process right now with the MPCA. So this development did go through 2 rounds of sketch plat review, first at the Planning Commission in January of this year, and then second at the City Council level. At that time, we generally heard comments on the building size and location, the amount of parking provided, and the location of retail. So on the screen now is the rendering of this project provided by the developer. This has gone through a number of different changes, and this, what you'll see, it looks different than what you may remember seeing at the sketch plat review. So after sketch plat, the developer kind of came back and met with staff to see how they can better incorporate the feedback that they received from the city during that sketch plat process. One of the things you'll notice they did was decrease the height of the building on Rose Street in order to complement the development that's existing in the area. Another thing that they did was step back the building really where it sits at Rose and 5, and really try to break down the bulk of the structure at that location. They also increased the amount of retail area and concentrated that retail closer to the corner of Rose and 5. So here's a site plan that was submitted with the development. A couple things worth noting that you can see here. The developer is proposing to actually reconstruct Rose Street. They'd pull Rose Street to the west. That would allow for the inclusion of a number of on-street parking stalls where there is not space currently. In the internal area of the site, you'll see a surface parking lot, which is surrounded by the building. And then enclosed underneath the building would be those enclosed parking stalls. So here's the preliminary plat submitted with this request. It's really busy. There's a lot going on here real estate-wise, and so one of the things you'll expect at the time of final plat is those vacations being approved for the right-of-way vacations. And then also this aggregates all of those 7 properties and provides, lastly, the public right-of-way on Rose Street to allow for that reconstruction. So a little bit more about the land uses here. What's being proposed specifically is multifamily residential, and that's, again, 125 units, along with commercial. And what we think they're going to be doing on this site at the time, although we don't know exactly who will be there, it's likely a retail and service use that would be in this location, highly visible from Highway 5, where the retail is going to be located. So there are some conditional use permits required under the city code for this particular project: building height over 35 feet, multifamily residential, and then there is commercial and multifamily in the shoreline overlay. Those conditional use permits that are not in the shoreline ordinance would be simply incorporated into the PUD ordinance, sort of a small but important detail. So on the land use topic, we did review this against the city's adopted comprehensive plan. The density for this site as proposed is 47.31 units per acre. That falls right in the middle of the city's allowable density range, which is between 24 and 75 units per acre. Worth noting also is that this site is classified for downtown mixed use. That future land use category guides towards a mix of different types of land uses that are compatible, one being smaller scale retail and office buildings, and the other being vertical mixed use buildings with retail or office uses on the ground floor and other uses, including residential on upper floors. This is a pretty key site in the city on Highway 5, and so the comprehensive plan does provide a bit more guidance on gateways. I won't read the whole thing here on the screen. This is from the city's comp plan, and really what it is trying to express is that in these high-profile areas, we should be really focusing on making sure design is kind of presenting Victoria how Victoria wants to be seen. So this image on the screen is pulled directly from the comprehensive plan, which references, this is actually the city's downtown master plan. And so you can see encircled in right is the subject property. So this site is guided for mixed use and retail uses, which are being proposed here. In addition, this particular plan provides a number of guidance goals. You can see on the right of the screen, I would say a majority of those goals are addressed by this proposal. Okay, so into the weeds a bit more with the design review. First, one of the things that we look at is the structure and the bulk regulations for the project, and then lastly, get into a bit more of the architectural review with building materials and design. So in terms of bulk standards, we're looking at a building height, which in this case, as proposed, will vary from roughly 44 to 65 feet, depending on where you are along the structure. On the bottom of the screen is an elevation of the building as seen from Rose Street. And so you can see on the left or on the south part of this elevation, you've got the retail use. In the center of the building, you've got a transition from on the ground floor from retail to amenity space. And then on the north side of this elevation is just purely residential units. So the height will depend where you are because it's measured from the grade to the top of the flat roof. Pervious surface is met by this proposal. It has to stay under 80%, and that is being shown. Lastly, there are no setbacks for a project of this nature in the central business district. The goal is to bring development to the sidewalk or the property boundary. So here again is that site plan showing you how this will all look, and I'll reference this throughout the rest of the presentation. So looking at the building materials, one of the things that is highly suggested by the design standards is adaptation of details from around the downtown area and design precedent. This project does appear to be doing that. You can see a number of kind of different looks that you're seeing across this elevation on the bottom of the screen. All are taking details from existing development in downtown Victoria. Ground level design and building materials, both of those areas do appear to be met. However, didn't have enough specificity in the submitted plans to make absolutely certain. So what I'm doing here is saying we may need a deviation for this. It looks like we don't, but it's possible. And so we would just like to confirm that before we adopt a PUD ordinance, just to make sure that they have what they need. Color, the city code does limit projects to up to 2 primary colors. With the size of this building and the way that they're articulating kind of different prominent facade designs, it looks like they're using 3. That would be a deviation under the city code. I'm just gonna kind of skim through a couple of the different elevations that were submitted by the applicant. So here you can see on the top of the screen, the building from Highway 5. On the bottom, this is the building as you would see it from the interior of the lot, the surface parking area. The same for the top of this slide. And then the bottom of this slide is the elevation of the north side of the building. You'd be looking at this from the LRT, the trail, and you'd probably be just a little bit below grade here as you're seeing this part of the building. Okay, so I'm going to transition to talking a little bit more now about the site plan review. In this review, we looked at the parking, pedestrian connections, landscaping, and building signage. So I'm going to take my time working through this parking. And at the end of the presentation, if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to go back to this. So the applicant provided a number of different types of parking stalls with this project as they're proposing it. First and foremost, they included 148 enclosed parking stalls in their proposal. These enclosed stalls are proposed under the building. That parking area is just directly under the building in that footprint area. The surface parking lot, which you see on this site plan in the center of the site, has 76 stalls proposed. And then the on-street parking through the reconstruction of Rose Street will include 34 parking stalls. So the total here is 258 parking stalls that are new to the city. So on this next slide, I'm showing you a breakdown of what is being proposed. So The developer has requested a PUD deviation to allow them to have a slightly reduced parking requirement, and that would be a ratio of 1.5 stalls to 1 dwelling unit. And so I've broken down how that looks as opposed to 2.0 stalls per dwelling unit on the top of this table. So at the end of the day, 188 stalls would be required for the residential use on this property only. That would leave an additional 70 stalls that are being provided above and beyond those required for residential units at 1.5 ratio. I should mention that one of the things that the developer used to support their parking ratio request was submitting a parking demand study. And so that demand study was done by a certified engineer who specializes in that area, and they use market comparables. They look at projects that are similar across the metro and what they've been built with. It also uses industry standard guidance from transportation guidelines. So I just wanted to mention that that study actually ended up supporting the request for 1.5 units per dwelling unit, and that was before the developer reduced the parking rate, or the unit count rather, from 130 to 125, which is what they have now. They have shown that they can park their residential use. So understanding that, we looked at, well, we're going to have retail uses in this building, and how would that impact the resulting available stalls? So with a showroom use, you would be left with 53 available stalls for the rest of the public. With a retail and service use, you would be left with 39 stalls. So what this means is at a ratio of 1.5 parking stalls per dwelling unit, we're parking both the residential units and whatever commercial use that they're proposing, and then having an additional 39 parking stalls left over for anyone else in the public. One of the reasons we want to make sure we get this 1.5 ratio requirement right is so that we have, we're right sizing the requirement for parking, leaving an additional X number of stalls available for the public. If we required higher than 1.5 and they don't need it, what we're really doing is limiting the pool of available public parking. That has to be, because any stall in the surface lot that's part of that required residential parking has to be stalled for residential parking only.
It has to be signed for that.
Yeah, sorry, it has to be signed and reserved for that residential parking only.
A quick question on the parking demand study before we leave this. You said the contractor that did the parking study looked at similar projects. Did they look at similar cities? For instance, we are a certain distance from any public transit. Do they incorporate that into their parking study?
Yeah, I think that it was a mix of 4 different sites that they were looking at, and some of them were in areas served by transit. Some of them were in areas that weren't as well served by transit. I don't know the names of those communities off the top of my head, and I don't know. We do have the traffic consultant here, so I might just kind of mark that as a note for the developers team when we are able to ask questions.
Thank you.
Great. All right, I'm going to move forward with the presentation, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. So so that pretty much sums up the review for parking. Staff are supportive, therefore, of that ratio request. It seems reasonable based on what we've seen. So pedestrian connections provided by the site. One of the things that we want to make sure we have in downtown Victoria is continuous sidewalks that run along and through sites, providing really good pedestrian access and environment. On this site along Rose Street, there is a 10-foot wide sidewalk, which is definitely seen as kind of a best practice. The wider sidewalk, the better, really. Crossings are also provided across Rose Street at key locations. One of them is at Rose and 5. Another is a mid-block crossing that I'll hover over with the cursor right in front of the structure in the retail area. And then lastly, staff are recommending another crossing be added at the north side of this development at Rose and Steiger. Street trees and lighting are also provided by the development. They're going to provide a better, more walkable environment with good streetscaping. Lastly, the design of the walks and pedestrian areas will match the rest of the city's downtown area, or at least that's what staff is recommending we require. So in looking at the tree preservation plan, the developer is proposing to remove all the trees on site. It's a pretty tight site in downtown, so that would be something we would be expecting from virtually any applicant in this area. The developer is proposing to pay an in lieu fee for any remaining tree mitigation that is required outside of what they're planting. I would note too that they are planting 51 trees. So they are actually planting more trees than are required under the city's landscaping requirements, and I'll talk about that in a second. Staff are, though, recommending that we require the revision of the tree removal plan to show trees on the north side of this site to make sure that we understand what types of trees are located where in case there's any incidental tree loss as a result of the project. We want to make sure that we have the ability to require mitigation if needed. Another thing that we would like to just make sure that we have is the understanding from Hennepin County Railroad Authority that there is a project going on here. There is the potential for it to impact some of those existing trees or some of the vegetation along the trail corridor. So staff is, just to sum that up, staff is proposing a couple different conditions of approval to make sure that tree mitigation is accounted for. Okay, landscaping. The developer is meeting the landscaping requirements in summary. The only one that they're not meeting is the boulevard planting requirements. That is every 35 feet that you have to have a boulevard tree. That's pretty difficult on Rose Street where we're kind of managing parking and streetscaping and all of those things. The developer is meeting the boulevard tree requirement along 5. So that will kind of break up the project nicely from the highway. But on Rose Street, given that there is a lot going on there, staff are supportive of a deviation from the 35-foot requirement. Okay, the last part of the site plan review is the signage review. The developer has submitted a master sign plan. We walked through this with the Planning Commission. This sign plan, in looking at it, will necessitate a couple deviations, which seem to be relatively minor in the grand scheme of the development. So what they're proposing is a large blade sign, which would be located right on Highway 5, wall signage, which meets the city's requirement, small blade signs, which will provide good wayfinding and allow people to find the retail uses. And then lastly, there would be some unknown signage when they find a future retail tenant. That would be reviewed against the city standards if and when that does occur. So this image on the screen kind of helps to illustrate the types of signage that the developer is requesting. The small blade signs you can see kind of on the front of the screen here as we move north along Rose Street. This parking sign staff are proposing be consistent with the rest of the city's wayfinding downtown, meeting all of those kind of ongoing wayfinding efforts. You can see the wall sign on the building on Rose marking retail and leasing areas. So those are the different types of signs. Not included in this rendering is the blade sign, which would help to make this development noticeable along 5. So here on the screen is a summary of the deviations that will be required for the project. This was provided in the staff report, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this slide. Shoreline overlay requests, I wanted to talk about these separate from the rest of the development review. There are a couple conditional use permits required for developments of this nature in the shoreline overlay. One is for a commercial use. We have 8,700 square feet of that commercial use proposed here, and then multifamily residential. And so when we do what's called an RSPUD, which is any type of project with attached units of over 5, we are required to do this RSPUD review. Multifamily projects in the central business district are not, the ordinance does not really clearly contemplate that there would be multifamily projects proposed, and it makes it difficult for multifamily projects to meet the ordinance. And so that is why staff and the DNR actually have recommended using the variance process to approve this development and any others that like it that are to occur. So what I'm trying to say is that the RSPUD, if we go through the tiering analysis, which I'll talk about on a future slide, basically limits the project to a density that is not even compatible with the city's comp plan. It would keep it lower than what the comp plan is looking for. So there is kind of some conflict between our shoreland ordinance and the comprehensive plan. The other thing is that the developer would be required to provide 50% open space for the project. That is a really difficult thing to accomplish in a central business district where you have really you've got to maximize the entire site in order to make a project work. So on the screen, you can see the DNR shoreland classification and special water body designation map. What this shows is that, the project area being starred on the screen, but the rest of the downtown area is very close to all of these lakes as well. So you're going to see this issue with other developments very likely. So this screen kind of shows you the extent of the 1,000-foot buffer around those water bodies. So we did require a tiering analysis with the DNR's suggestion from the developer. And again, what this showed was that at maximum, even with a density bonus, which is allowed in the city's shoreline overlay, the developer would only be able to do 17.26 units on the site. That is definitely not going to be allowing them to meet the city's comp plan requirement of 24 at a minimum units per acre. So that is why staff are supportive of the variance request. And staff have also been talking to the DNR staff about how we can get around this administrative issue in the future. And the other communities in the area have used exemptions for areas very similar to the central business district. So that is something potentially worth exploring or more consideration in the future. So I've been really long-winded. I'm going to throw it over to Kara for engineering review.
Karen, welcome.
Hi, thank you. You just want to get a drink of water and hide. So I just have a couple of topics to cover here. First, I just want to highlight some information related to traffic. So that the discussion of traffic came up during the sketch plat review. We did require the applicant to provide a traffic study, but before I speak to their specific traffic study, I do want to just note that traffic coming from the central business district and traffic as a whole in Victoria with ongoing growth and development throughout the county is something that's studied over time. So I wanted to reference a couple of specific studies that had been previously completed that would be relevant. In 2018, the city hired a consultant to do a traffic study specifically looking at downtown. So that was after the downtown master plan was completed. We used the information from that plan and took a look at traffic impacts, specifically as it relates to key intersections in and out of downtown, just to understand how the roads within downtown would function with the proposed vision from the plan. Following that, then, the Arboretum Area Transportation Plan was created, and that took a look at traffic projections based on the city's 2040 comprehensive plan, as well as Waconia's comprehensive plan, the county's plans, and that included a look at plan redevelopment. So it was a much more comprehensive look at transportation. That plan was more focused on Highway 5 and the key major intersections along Highway 5, so by Dairy Queen, by Floyd's, 78th and Steiger, some of those more significant intersections. And that study, as the council knows, outlines a vision and timing for improvements to the entire transportation system throughout the city of Victoria. So following all of that, after the concept review, the sketch plat review, the ROARS team did hire a consultant to do a specific traffic study for their proposed project. And I did just want to note here what the purpose of that study is to figure out what the anticipated trip generation is from that specific project and what the impacts are on that traffic on the infrastructure nearby it to identify if any improvements are needed. So in summary, what the traffic study found was that the proposed improvements would include 57 additional AM peak hour trips, 92 PM peak hour trips, and 899 daily trips. And given the existing volumes and capacity, no improvements were recommended as a result of taking a look at those traffic implications. The traffic study did assume that Rose Street would be a right-in, right-out, because that's what's in the long-term vision for Highway 5. The reason the consultant elected to do that is that would push more traffic onto the local network, onto Steiger Lake Lane, which is what we were specifically getting asked about. So they looked at a worst-case scenario in that situation. The traffic study did include a recommendation to consider an all-way stop at the intersection of Steiger Lake Lane and Rose Street. So that would be something that the city we would take a look at should a project move forward through the lens of the city's stop sign warrant policy to see if that's consistent or not. This is just a table here taking a look at the proposed different types of uses that could occur on the site. So the proposed development is on the bottom with the multifamily residential and retail. The numbers here are slightly different. This was drafted before the refined number of units dropped. So the proposed traffic would actually be a little lower than what you see here. But they did take a look at if that site were to develop with something different. As an example, 20,000 square foot grocery store, you'd see a lot more significant traffic from a more intense use compared to what's proposed with multifamily residential. And then I'm not gonna spend a ton of time on this slide, but this specifically is taking a look at which direction the traffic would leave from the site, both number of trips per day and then impacts on key intersections. So, you really just aren't talking about a significant increase in traffic compared to what you would typically see on a 2-lane road in a downtown area. So nothing specific was raised as an issue. I am to also speak to the utilities on the site. So there's existing city sewer and water available in Rose Street that they will be accessing to provide sewer and water service to the building. They will need to extend a water main to provide additional fire protection to the building, was a comment provided by the fire chief that would be incorporated into any final design. But probably more noteworthy than the sewer and water is that when you look at this plan, you aren't seeing areas being set aside for stormwater management. And the reason for that is this area is served by the city's downtown regional stormwater system that is located on the other side of Highway 5. So if you continue down the trail, there's a 2-tiered stormwater management system. We first constructed it in 2003, and then we expanded it 2018, 2019 through a grant that the Watershed District helped us obtain to expand that system to meet current requirements, because requirements changed over time. So this project, the storm sewer system, will connect to that regional system, and they will, one of the fees that they'll be required to pay is an area charge to access that infrastructure that we built many years ago now. And I think that's my last slide.
Okay, so a couple quick slides to cap things off for this presentation. So parkland dedication is a requirement through the subdivision process. In this particular case, you've got up on the screen, you can see a number of different amenities. This is actually pulled from the city's website. There is a nice resource that shows all of the different park amenities throughout the community. This is showing those in the area of downtown. This does not necessarily show you the 6 square miles of Carver Park Reserve that are pretty much directly north of this site. So there, in short, are a lot of park amenities in the area, and therefore staff would support a request to pay cash in lieu of parkland dedication. So the project was reviewed both internally and externally. Internal review included all the departments, not limited to the fire chief. The fire chief provided a number of comments which were included in the staff report and would be conditions of approval to meet those. One of them was making sure that emergency vehicles can travel under that opening, that the access for the surface parking lot gets from Rose Street. Public Works and the Building Department also had an opportunity to review the project and provide comments to the staff. So external reviewers, there are, in this case, a number of them. As mentioned, the DNR was provided with the application and allowed for the time to comment on it. And once we got through the administration process of the shoreline overlay, there were no comments on the request. So no comments on the CUP or variances. The Minnesota Department of Transportation was provided an opportunity to review this as the project is on TH5. They had a very light review memo and hardly any comments actually there. There was one comment on noise and another from the highway and another comment on bike parking next to the trail. Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, I believe, is currently has already reviewed the project and issued a permit for it, or it will have to before the project begins. And lastly, Carver County, Hennepin County Railroad Authority, and Three Rivers Park District all have reviewed this project in the sense that it's proximate to the trail, and there was a trail connection explored at one point. So the Planning Commission held a public hearing at its regular meeting on June 20th of 2023. Last week already. There was a public hearing at that meeting. We heard from a number of members of the community. There were some comments very generally on traffic, parking, the design of the building, the massing. The Planning Commission did hear from staff and the developer. Ultimately, they unanimously recommended the project to you for approval. So staff is recommending approval on the basis that this project does meet the city's plans and policies and is requesting reasonable flexibility where it is required. There are 20 conditions of approval proposed to you in the staff report and the resolution that would approve this project. I've gone through a number of them already during this presentation, but you're welcome to ask questions if you have them. So lastly, I'll leave you with a sample motion on the screen here, and that concludes my presentation. I'd note that the developer and his whole team is here if you have questions for them, as I think you might on the parking study. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. First. Council, questions? All right. I will.
May I, city planner and I had an exchange today about one point, and I think he underscored the point, but maybe I can just ask him to do it again. Nathan and I talked about the fact that with respect to the building height and maybe building massing as well, there's sort of two avenues that the city would have to allow the building which exceeds the base requirement of 35 feet. The two avenues for doing that would be your code explicitly allows you to do that by conditional use permit. That's one avenue to allowing this proposed building. The other avenue, and I think this is the avenue that staff is pursuing, is that in your PUD, your Plan Unit Development Ordinance, you can, of course, create new requirements, new base requirements for a development in this area. I understand that that is where the change in the base 35-foot requirement would be expressed. It would be part of the PUD. That's legally significant, and so I just want to make a point and let Nathan confirm that that's how we're doing it.
Why are we selecting the PUD rather than the CUP? What's the?
You want the legal or the planning answer?
I think I want to hear them both, actually. I want to hear and compare them both. So let's start with the
Mayor, maybe I can start and Bob can jump
Yeah,
in
let's do
when
that.
things get tenuous. So from my perspective, it makes the most sense to articulate all of the standards for the development in the PUD ordinance. That's where your staff are going to be looking when the development comes forward or needs something in the future or something of that nature. We would be looking at the PUD ordinance and we would see that they have an approval that allows them to build a building to a certain height. So if they came in 40 years and wanted to add another story or something, we would be looking at that PUD ordinance, and that would be where we have those standards. It's procedurally also better, I think, just to kind of consolidate all of the approvals into one kind of ordinance as opposed to from CUP and variance here or something of that nature. We're kind of getting everything in the same process. So I don't know.
It's
If it's
neater from a
neater.
planning standpoint. And
And
from a
Mayor-
legal standpoint?
Mayor and council, I'm sitting here smiling because I'm trying to think, how do I do this in 5 minutes or less? And so I'm going to do it in 5 minutes or less.
All right, go.
Essentially, what's requested on this particular request, which is a request to exceed the base 35-foot height limitation, that is obviously a request to deviate from the base standard. I will tell you that you're not the only city that would allow a deviation like that to be done by conditional use permit. There are other places in your code where you allow deviations by conditional use permit, and there are other cities that use CUPs to allow deviations. But really, when I say the word deviation, what I'm saying is a variation, right? It's a variation from your base requirement, and that's what a variance is for. And so really the right tool, the right planning device to use, in my view, to grant those kind of deviations is a variance rather than a conditional use permit. And I realize that your eyes are glazing over, but my fundamental concern is that it's better if our code provides for deviations like this by variance than if it provides for it by conditional use permit. And that's something that's obviously an amendment to some provisions in your code that would be required. But that's basically my legal concern, is that given that we have two ways of doing this, the PUD approach is the more legally appropriate way to address the height of the building.
Okay, very good. Any questions about that?
None?
All right. I have parking and traffic questions, so whomever is willing to answer parking and traffic questions, please.
You sat through the other meeting.
Yeah, step to the podium, tell us who you are.
Council members, my name is Matt Pacina with TC2. Our address is 17515 26th Avenue North, Minneapolis.
Okay, terrific. Matt Decina?
Pacina,
Pacina,
like the
sorry about
Spanish
that.
swimming pool.
Sorry about that, okay.
No worries.
So let's start with the parking. So the parking demand study that you did allowed for this 1.5 ratio based on, similar projects around. One of the concerns that we have here in Victoria is the fact that we do not have public transit that serves Victoria. So can you talk a little bit about the comparable cities and projects that you used to do your parking demands
Mayor,
study?
council members, great question. So when we do a parking study, we look at a number of different factors. We'll look at city code, which city staff outlined very well here this evening. We also look at the Institute of Transportation Engineers. They have data across the country with similar land uses, and that'll give us kind of average and 85th percentile guidance on how many parking spaces for a particular land use and size or number of units. Then we also look at kind of what is the market saying, right? So that's where we've done so many of these over the years. We have a pretty good set of market data that looks at different types of similar uses across the metro. And so the cross section that we brought here ranges from Minnetonka, Hopkins, Edina, Maple Grove, and into Minneapolis. And you can see clearly the developments that are closer to transit. They have parking ratios closer to like 1 or 0.75 per unit. A lot of the Minnetonkas that are a little bit more suburban, that don't have that proximity to transit or good reliable transit, they're closer to that 1.4 to 1.5 range. And so that's where we feel comfortable from a parking ratio perspective at that 1.5, which is still pretty healthy from an overall parking perspective. And then the only other piece that I wanted to add from a parking side of things is that city code kind of typically will look at things in a box, right? That, okay, it's a retail use, it's a residential use, and they both have their parking demands. What that city code doesn't do is it doesn't look at the kind of the overlap where a residence or a multifamily apartment will have their parking demand really happens overnight when residents are sleeping. A retail use, their peak demand actually happens more during the day when it's more active because they're not open during the evenings. And so when you look at a shared parking use, that parking demand actually comes down even further for the overall site. And so that's why we feel confident that the overall development is providing more than enough parking to serve the development itself as well as provide additional parking for the community.
Okay, great. Questions on parking?
Yeah,
Yeah, Councilmember Gunderson.
the use on parking is we're still in a fallout period from the pandemic, so people are shifting the way they work. So is that accounting for people working from their apartment or working from a mobile site or working from wherever they might be? Because typically, yes, in the past, they're using it at night. Now, they're using it all day because they're working from their house. So what are the trends and what are we seeing as the fallout is still kind of settling from the transition we just went through?
Yeah, so a
Mr.
lot of,
Pacina.
great question. So a lot of our resources are continually updated as more data comes in. And so that's the factors that we use from IT, the Institute of Transportation Engineers. It's regularly being updated as data comes in. And so it's the best data we have to use. And then the market conditions are a great kind of barometer that's a little bit more accurate too when you factor of, well, is this development successful or not successful? Is it underparked, overparked, things like that.
So does the retail or commercial use dictate parking issues? Like, for instance, let me ask it in a different way. For instance, if a restaurant wanted to come into that retail part of it, how does that compare then if, say, a medical office would want to come into that retail space?
Yeah, so different land uses have different parking demands,
Sure.
right? Different times, different amounts. And so for these types of studies, we'll take an average look at things, knowing that it's a specific type of general retail. And typically what we find in these types of kind of more, strip retail, I'll call it, even though it's kind of mixed use development, that you end up with a kind of a wide range of uses that have pretty complementary parking demands. So you'll have a coffee shop that has a morning demand, but then it doesn't really do much during the day, relative to if you end up with some type of restaurant that has a parking that's more in the evenings on Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays. So it ends up kind of balancing out from an overall larger retail perspective. Now, if we were looking at one specific site, then it would be a little bit more impactful. But when you kind of balance it across, a number of different potential users, it starts to average out.
Okay. Is there anything that's a deal breaker? So one of the things we mentioned was grocery. So is grocery a deal breaker in this site? Is that something we couldn't accommodate because we don't have the parking?
That would have to be evaluated. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I think, from my experience on the size of grocery stores, right? I mean, I think there's something would have to give in an overall number of units or things like that. But.
Okay, very good. All right. Any other thoughts on parking, as long as we have Mr. Pacina in front of us?
With the interior
Councilmember Gunderson.
signed parking, how often are residents parking in the public parking? Do you see that as a problem? That in a study where you see residents, say the flats, they've got a parking stall inside there. In your study, does that account for if they're parking outside versus at their stall?
So I can't speak to who's parking where in each individual spot. What we can speak to is how many cars are parked on a site. And that's the overall, what ends up being the actual demand. And so that's accounted for, whether it's somebody parking that actually has a garage spot versus a not garage spot, that would, outside of kind of, and that might be a question for Marty, the developer. He might have a little more insights on how he manages his site with respect to parking. But from an overall parking demand, it's not going to change.
So resident or not resident, if they're parked in the public parking, it's just a car versus a free spot in the.
Correct. Strictly from a demand perspective.
Okay.
Very good.
I do have a question about
Councilmember Edwards.
first, I guess, can you tell me how many, what the breakdown of bedrooms are? I think the planning commission, you said just over 50%, I want to say, were I guess what I'm getting at is, we've seen the flats is at 1.3. We've heard of their development is proposing 1.3. With at least that other development, 78% of their apartments are 1 bedroom or less. There are more 2 and 3 bedroom apartments in this, which means potential for more cars, right? So if you have 2 bedroom, right? I'd anticipate if there's a lot of 1 bedrooms, not a guarantee that you have only 1 car, but you're more likely to have 1 car. In this case, there are 3 bedroom, 2 bedroom, which could increase the amount of cars.
All right. We've got somebody who wants to answer that question. So, lots of excitement about that. Mr. McCarthy, are you going for
You
the?
got 2.
Oh.
Marty McCarthy with Rohr's Companies. and Jeff with Momentum Design Group, Jeff Reedy. And so Jeff can give the numbers of units that are larger and that percentage. But generally in 3 bedrooms, what we're anticipating is we're going to see empty nesters downsizing into these bigger units. And so that third unit or that third room is likely going to be more of a office space or something like that. And then they probably use another room for storage if they're a married couple or something like that. So, so that's the 3 bedrooms. Jeff, do you want to talk about how many?
Yep.
The unit mix?
Certainly. Jeff Rady from Momentum Design Group. So the 1 bedrooms, we have 50%. Alcoves, we have 7%. That's a little different than a studio, but it's basically a studio. 2 bedrooms, we have 31%. And 3 bedrooms, we have 8%.
So it was 50% 1 bedroom, 7% alcove, 31% 2 bedroom, and 8% 3 bedroom.
Almost
Did I get that right?
40% 2 or 3 bedroom, right?
What I would say about the 3 bedrooms is that we really anticipate that to be an older crowd moving into those units. It's not like a downtown site where maybe there'd be 3 or 4, or even a student housing site where there'd be 3 people
Sure.
bunking up into the same place.
Got it. Okay. Other parking questions? Okay, let's go to traffic. Are we back to you, Mr. Pacina, for that? And
Popular tonight, I
and
like it.
I'm sure Kara will jump in here. So, can we, I don't want to dwell on the parking. This is going to generate some traffic, no question. Rose Street's pretty narrow. We're going to widen the street to, is the street actually going to be wider for driving or just wider because we want to park on the street?
So we're widening the street to add parking. Right now, there's angle parking on one side and no parking on the other side. Instead, there will be 90-degree parking like Randy's Way along there. The driving lanes will remain consistent with what we have throughout downtown. So when we developed the downtown design standards, the goal was for it to be not a raceway for traffic, but rather narrow streets that we expect cars to move slowly through and accommodate pedestrians at various locations. So the roadway width will be similar to what it is today, which is consistent with the rest of downtown.
All right, terrific. And this development does not generate enough additional parking to be of concern for the capacity, but I am curious about capacity. How much more capacity is on those roads after this development? Mr. Pacina.
Perfect. So capacity of a 2-lane roadway, right? We kind of look at it a lot of different ways, but to keep it very high level from an average daily traffic volume, a 2-lane roadway can handle 8,000 cars a day, pretty handily. Rose Street today probably has about 500 cars a day on it. And so when you add the development in, if you think about 900 daily trips, we talk about, well, that's going to split kind of 2 ways. So the actual overall impact, whether you're north of the development axis or south, that kind of splits pretty evenly. So you're still going to be 1,000 vehicles or less. So you're going to have more than enough capacity from a roadway perspective. And even as you look at Steiger Lake Road and kind of wrapping back into the signal at Highway 5, once again, those roadways are well within that 8,000 cars a day range. And we don't expect any kind of really significant impact from a traffic operations perspective as part of the development.
Okay, and they will not be able to take a left off of Highway 5 onto Rose Street?
So I'm going to jump in there. So the current condition right now is full access on Rose Street, and that's going to remain a full access until we get into the long-range improvements to 5, where we extend the 4-lane through downtown. If you recall from the Arboretum Area Transportation Plan, that is in the long-range plan. So the access will remain as it is today. And I think, in my own personal opinion, what you'll see is something similar to what we experience on Quamaqlet, where even us, when we're leaving City Hall, depending on time of day, we won't necessarily take Quamaclet, we'll go over to the signal, so you have a signalized intersection to get on and off of 5, and so I think you'll see some of that occurring. We will be, and I didn't have this on my slide, but with the work that the council just authorized at the last council meeting, we will be updating traffic analysis at those key intersections as part of the Highway 5 Downtown West preliminary design that the council authorized, because we really want to understand what the city's proposed land use is for the 13.5 acres and how that traffic is going to distribute. That, depending on what the city decides to locate there, that could have a much more significant impact within downtown than even what we're talking about here today. So that's, as we're looking at how Steiger Lake Lane wraps through, what the connections to 5 are at Steiger Lake Lane, what happens at the intersection by Floyd's that has some operational challenges with the lack of the dedicated left turning movement, that we'll be looking at in greater detail to take all of this potential development into account.
Okay, so that was my other question was, is there a dedicated left turn lane planned once this development is off of Highway 5?
So right now, are you talking about at 5 and 11?
Yes.
So we really have to decide.
I'm sorry, not 5 and 11, 5 in Rose.
Where you're getting on to 5.
Yeah, so if you're coming from the west and you want to turn onto Rose Street,
Or that way too, yeah.
so if you're coming from Waconia and you want to take a left on Rose Street,
Trying to even remember what the existing,
There is a left turn there
There's a-
today. There is a left
Okay.
turn there today. Long-term, as part of the Arboretum Transportation Plan, Rose Street is planned to be a right in, right out. So eventually there'll be a median along Highway 5. So you won't be able to access Rose Street from the west.
you'll have to go to the light. Or,
You'll have to go to the light or turn prior if Steiger Lake's still there, or at the roundabout by Dairy Queen.
okay,
Are there concerns, you mentioned, because of time of day, right? Like you might not go at Rose Street just like Quamaclet.
yeah.
Yes. Can we change the name of that? Is there concerns about then the amount of backup at the, right? If a lot of people now that are at the apartment are having to go around, have to come to the stoplight with a backup there, and how that might affect things?
So when we did the Arboretum Area Transportation Plan and looked at that intersection, we had projected data for potential downtown redevelopment based on the city's comprehensive plan. And what we concluded through there was that we really need to look at just making a modification. The bigger issue is the 11 to 5 movement. And you've all experienced it when you're leaving downtown, you have to kind of make eye contact to see if they're gonna go. So we do need to look at reconfiguring that intersection. Right now, it was plugged into the plan in 28, but we've been talking with Lyndon and Darren at the county about moving that up to 25 and really doing it in conjunction with the roundabout by Dairy Queen. So we'll be taking a really close look at the timing of that in the next 3 months to figure out what the right time frame is to do that.
Is that talking about back when we had like the recommendations of changing instead of having the dedicated lane to a right turn being the dedicated left turn type thing?
Yeah, so we'd have to remove that bump out that, exists and do a little bit of lane configuration. I think it was about $100,000 cost estimate, so it's not terribly expensive. It's just figuring out what the right timing is to impact traffic. So, this whole big puzzle piece of trying to figure out when to do these projects so we aren't disrupting the same area every year. But yeah, so we're looking at possibly what it would look like to do that in 25 with that other work by Dairy Queen. Alternatively, it's something though that the city could take a look at doing whenever. Let's say 5 improvements weren't happening. That's certainly something that the city can initiate. We're the owner of one of the legs of the intersection, and the county would be supportive of us taking that on whenever we think the timing makes sense.
Okay. Continuing on with the topic of traffic.
Can I ask for just a
Yeah,
clarification?
Councilmember Rife, please.
So coming from the coming from the east, I understand, turning into Rose, but coming from the west again, my option is roundabout at Victoria, right? There's a median there. I can't get into Rose, so I come to the stoplight, take a left, or I do a U-turn back around.
Potentially.
So the other thing too, you gotta remember is Steiger Lake Lane will go through to County Road 13, or to, sorry, Highway 11, north. Once the 13.5 acres develops, Steiger will go through to there. So, you know, a person might come up the roundabout and then come home via Steiger to get to this location. Depending on what we end up with, you know, we haven't resolved with MnDOT what access looks like between the bridge and the intersection of by Dairy Queen. And that's really gonna be the heavy lift for the next 3 months, is working with the proposed traffic and with MnDOT to resolve what that access looks like. For years, they've said no access or write-in only, and the city's position has been full access. So we need to reconcile that, and of course, take into consideration what's happening on the south side of 5 there with those business, they need access as well. So that's the consultant that we hired. That's one of the first things they have to look at, and that'll come back to the council, and there'll be a public engagement process associated with that
Okay.
as well.
Okay. Traffic and parking. Any other thoughts, questions?
I just had one quick question on,
Yeah, Councilmember Vansky.
on just take a minute to talk about the loading patterns of time of day on this study that you performed. Was this more or less data that was pre-pandemic driven, or how recent is it? Because I'm trying to get a sense as to if we're talking pre-pandemic data, it's entirely possible that we could get back to those levels. I mean, it's no surprise that corporations are now starting to see how expensive their office space is, and they want to get people to return back to places that they're paying for. So was the traffic based on that, or is it more recent and representative of where things are today?
I would, that's a great question. From a trip generation perspective, for the most part, I would say it's more of a traditional pre-pandemic traffic volume that we've looked at as part of this study. And that's really gonna be a worst case, right? Where more people are going from a work perspective, kind of your traditional morning peak and your PM peak coming back. From an order of magnitude perspective, I mean, this development generates about 50, 60 trips in the morning peak hour, kind of your worst case in the morning. That's a car every minute. That's pretty benign. From an overall operations perspective, you almost don't even notice that. In the PM, you have about 90 cars, so that's a car, about a little less than a minute, 45 seconds. So once again, it's not a big impact, if you think about how long you can, or how far you can get in a 45 seconds, even walking. And so that's why we don't see a lot of overall impact as part of this development itself. It's just that order of magnitude is just, it's really pretty small.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Other questions? Not that we can't come back, but, okay. And then my next question is around the construction. I think you are finished for right now. Mr. McCarthy, I trust this is going to be your topic. And I want to talk about the construction plan. This is right in our downtown. Construction is disruptive. Let's talk through what that looks like.
So it's a large site, and this question came up last time, and Jeff and I were talking after this meeting, and Jeff said this is probably the biggest site he's had to work on with such a big project. So there's certainly opportunities to do a lot of the staging on the property where the parking lot is, and so I think most of that staging will be on the site. There might be some times when we might have to close rows, but we will be working with the city on creating a plan for phasing and staging. And so our team's gonna be working with the city as that starts to progress. But I believe we'll be fully on the site, with the exception of some closures for connecting to utilities, the downtown water, stormwater utility, and all of that. So
What are you thinking on, what's typical construction time frame?
This would be 16 to 18 months.
16 to 18, okay, so we're hearing that a lot. All right.
Kind of on
Roberts,
that,
please.
I'm just trying to visualize, on Rose Street, the entrance to the parking lot behind, so if you do have to close Rose, right, is there still ability, if they can't get in on Rose, to access? I guess I can't visualize it for some reason right now, I guess. Is there another way that they can get in to that parking lot?
Yeah.
So that we're not losing that parking lot as well?
I would imagine that there's certainly a way to do it where you can come in off of Steiger, come down Rose, turn into the parking lot, come out, and then exit onto Arboretum, and then that centrally kind of located space.
I just can't remember if the entrances are right.
There's two entrances off of Rose into the parking lot, and the
Yep.
city wouldn't allow them to close those.
Okay.
So,
But, yeah, I
But
was
I'm
gonna
like,
say,
I'm
but
just like, if they have to close it, then how do they get it?
Well, there's no other access to that parking lot
Yeah.
other than Rose, so.
So that, yeah.
they'd have to phase how they
Okay.
do the
Yeah,
work.
you go in one entrance and then close part of it, yeah. Okay.
Jeff just pointed that
Okay.
out as well, too.
Jeff, did you have something else to add, or you were just coming to the rescue with that answer?
I just wanted to make sure that,
His observation was the same thing as Kara's, was that it just, maybe the north side gets closed down,
Yep.
and then the south side
That
gets
makes
closed
sense,
down,
yep.
so that stays open all the time.
Okay, very good. All right, council, other questions?
Regarding just the general nature of the development, there's, a lot of info out there on the historic volumes of multifamily being done right now all over the country. What is this going to do if it comes online? Rents seem to be going down a bit. How is this going to compete in the marketplace to make sure that people continue to come here and utilize this space? That was done within a year at 90%. And so what are we looking at in terms of not just construction time, but how soon can we get to a good occupancy rate without turnover, so that we have people utilizing downtown, the retail that we're asking for, or looking for, and also then our already established shops?
Mr. McCarthy, please.
Yeah, sure. I think this thing's gonna lease up very quickly. And so I'm pretty sure Victoria Flats leased up very quickly. I don't have those numbers in my head, but that project currently has a waiting list for renters, and it's 100% occupied. So the building will lease up quickly. And as far as retailers go, I don't see a vacancy in downtown, so I really believe that we can get some good tenants here. We'll be engaging a real estate broker, or a retail broker in the next couple months. They tend to, the retailers tend not to be very interested until you've got one city approval. That's the big one. And then as soon as you start construction, then they can see a timeline towards when they can commit to a lease. So we're kind of in that lull to understand what we would go after.
Is your intention, because the picture, from your drive, is your intention to look for a restaurant on that corner? That kind of looks like what?
It could be a restaurant, but that facade could also be a coffee shop where you sit outside and have your coffee in the morning. But that space could also be broken up into, two 2,000 and then another two 1,000 square foot units. So it's really open to a lot of different options.
Will you have, with the parking lot in the back and then obviously the parking on the street, is the intention to have kind of a walk-through, like access to both sides type of thing?
Absolutely, yeah. The pass-through would have that space to walk through on sidewalks. And we also are proposing to do an EV charging station on the public side. So maybe a dual charger for the public. We will have EV charging in the garage, in the structured parking space for residents. And the way we're doing that is 10% of the units would have EV charging stations available at opening, and then another 20% made ready, because by this time, when this building opens up, The US auto manufacturers are proposed to have like half of the fleets that they're selling will be EV. So
And how do we move into the future then with additional EV? How easy is it to make that readily available after the 30% that you just proposed?
yeah, great observation. It's expanding on, and so Jeff, maybe this is a question for you.
So I always ask the same exact question, and our electrical engineers say that the technology for the charging stations is dramatically increasing, and they're able to modulate the pressure, the power from car to car to car. So they're very, I hate to say smart, they're smart chargers, but they talk to all of the vehicles and they find out which ones are the least charged, which ones are the most charged, and they put more charge on each one of those. So recently I've been saying we need space for a future transformer because all of these cars are going to be charged in the future. My electrical engineers are saying, no, you don't. You can get by with the charger, the transformer we have. Technology will save us.
Okay.
So that's coming straight from the electrical engineers.
And then what kind of, just while you're there, what ability do you have to add solar? Because this is it's roughly south without a lot of covering
Right.
around you. So is there an ability to incorporate some other?
The ability to add solar really just comes down to me structuring the building to support the weight of that additional solar panels and then throwing conduits through the building to feed those in the future.
And what does that look like in terms of cost? I know that it can be sometimes cost prohibitive. The weight here doesn't support it.
So it's negligible. It's 10 pounds a square foot, which is the same as a rock ballast on a ballasted roof. So, for example, if I just wanted to put a ballasted roof up there, and then Marty said, "Well, I want to put solar panels up there in 10 years," well, then we just got to take the rock off. We got to figure out how to maintain that membrane, and then put the 10-pound solar panels on there.
I'd love to see incorporations of growing with alternative energy sources. Just that's the way things seem to be moving, right? While there's some sources of energy that'll always be around, I still think that these options need to be explored.
Yeah, we are certainly considering the option of making the building ready for solar.
All right, council, other questions? Can we take a look at the facade again? Just, would you please, Nathan? Thank you.
The bigger one?
Yeah, please. There, let's do that. Okay. Does this project have a name?
The branding for it is called ROWE, ROWE.
Oh, okay. I think that's the first time I've heard that.
ROWE Residence, yeah.
Okay. All right.
I think maybe I asked this before at the last time you were here, but what's the amount of space from the building to Steiger Lake Lane? Is there a lot of room there between, like green space and, so it'd be the back of the building, right, facing?
I don't understand your question.
So from the road, right, so like you got road, sidewalk, green space, grass, right, up to the building. I guess I'm just wondering how much space there is.
On Rose
Can you go
Street?
back to?
Sorry,
Steiger
Steiger.
Lake.
Steiger.
Back here is,
So-
it's
So right in the corner?
right on the south
So
and north corner.
what I'm thinking about is, right, so we have our downtown west eventually, right? Steiger Lake is gonna be that bridge, right, between our current downtown and the Western Development. And I think there's lots of potential there for the city eventually, right, using it as, whether you have shops being able to go up on the side, right? So I'm just curious if there's how much space is in that area, so that if it is potential to do, if we have pop-up shops, eventually on that road.
Can you bring up C 2.1, 2-1?
Is that the site plan?
that
Sorry.
one right there,
Okay.
right there. So are you saying the area on the northeast quadrant of that right up there? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, basically like along that backside of that, right? Because we would have.
Yeah, that's a very steep hill as we go down. If it's right next to the bridge, and it's a very steep hill.
Yeah.
And it does go back down to the dog park in the back. We also have the transformer there as well.
Okay. And it's mainly just, I guess, that corner, right? Because Steiger Lake goes, goes the opposite, or not
Right, but
opposite.
that's the most
Yep.
distance from the road on
Okay.
the entire property.
Okay.
So it's about 30 feet.
Okay.
Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
because I mean, it's just in looking at it again here, right? It's basically just that one corner that's kind of close, and then you're veering away from Steiger Lake. Yes, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, council, other thoughts, other questions? Concerns?
Get this one out here.
All right, let's take a look at our motions here. I will entertain a motion. Can you tell me, do we need this in three, I think there were three separate things we were taking a look at.
Mayor and council, to answer that question, there would be just one resolution with this approval that approves preliminary plat, PUD, CUP, and shoreline variance requests. The findings are all articulated in the resolution, and staff recommended conditions of approval are also all in there.
Okay, very good. All right, that being said, council, I will take a motion.
I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution approving the preliminary plat, PUD, CUP, and shoreline variance request by the Roars Company for the Victoria mixed-use development with conditions and findings as proposed therein.
We've got a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations, you're on to the next step. Our next item is item 6.2, which calls for the business subsidy public hearing for the Roars mixed-use development. So consider this the save the date for the TIF hearing. And I think Jen Brewington, Ms. Brewington is going to present this evening on that.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. The item before you tonight that I'm presenting on is the call for the business subsidy for a public hearing. So just some background, the city has received an application for a business subsidy for the Roars Victoria mixed-use development, which consists of 125 market rate housing units and 8,700 square feet of retail and commercial space, which you're aware of. And that's to be constructed in the form of a redevelopment TIF district. In order to review the proposed TIF district, the City Council must schedule a TIF public hearing to consider the request. And a notice of the public hearing must be published in the newspaper, as well as a notice to the county and the school district to review and comment if they choose to do so. On the screen is the map of the TIF district. So the City Council will hold the public hearing on the modification of the development program for Development District Number 1, the establishment of a tax increment financing district, which is a redevelopment district, number 9, and the adoption of a tax increment financing plan. This hearing, the public hearing, was going to be held on July 24th, 2023, at a regular city council meeting, where the city will consider entering into an agreement under which the city will provide tax increment assistance to the developer. And in front of you, I have a sample motion for you to review, and I can stand for any questions.
All right, very good. Thank you, Ms. Brewington. At this, we'll get all the details from our consultant on what this TIF district looks like and meeting the but-for test and all those things that are important when we do a TIF.
Correct. You'll also review the TIF plan and any additional information along with that.
All right, very good. Thank you. Council, questions, comments? All right, at this point then, I will entertain a motion.
I make a motion for approval of the resolution calling for a public hearing on the modification of the development program for Development District Number 1, the creation of a tax increment financing district, redevelopment number 9, and the adoption of a tax increment financing plan.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next is item 6.3, which is a public hearing for the vacation of 4 easements in the Brookmore development. Presenting this evening, once again, is our consulting city planner, Mr. First. As we shuffle our chairs around here again, Mr. First, please.
Mayor, playing musical chairs this evening. I'm going to pull up a presentation for this item. So I have worked on this particular item with the city planner, Brian McCann. So both of us have kind of our fingerprints on this particular review. So about the Brookmore development, I think everyone is aware, we did review a final plat for the second edition of this development in late winter, early spring. So the development is southeast of Highway 5 and 13. It is in total 34 acres, of which 25 or just a bit over that are developable. It's 80 single-family homes, and the city has approved a PUD with an R1 underlying zoning district. So the second edition did receive approval as mentioned. The third edition final plat has been received from the developer, and Brian is currently working on his review for that particular and last addition to the development. So a bit of a timeline here on the screen. As mentioned, the city council approved the final plat in February. So there are in total 4 easement vacations being requested by the developer, and really the reason they're requesting these is actually in part because they were prompted by the county surveyor. The county surveyor, upon looking at the final plat for the second edition, noticed that a number of those lots would be encumbered by existing easements that are really no longer needed. When the developer platted the second edition, they gave the city the amount of right-of-way needed. They gave the city the amount of the side and rear yard easements that are necessary for all of those purposes of those areas. So the developer is therefore requesting the vacation of these now basically unnecessary easements that would encumber the lots. So there are 3 of those easements on the area covered by the Brookmore second edition final plat, and one of them is in the area that the third edition will cover. And so they've been broken apart because they are the third edition has not yet been approved. So in the second edition area on the screen, you can see a figure that shows you the rough location of these easements. There was a basically roadway easements that are no longer necessary along Cochia. And then there was a drain tile easement that follows that dashed line on the screen. That is the rough location, or was the rough location, of the drain tile. Okay, and then on the next slide here, you can see the location of that roadway easement all the way on the east side of this site in the third edition area. So being that particular part of the development has not yet been final approved, staff are proposing that resolution, if it's approved, simply be held until such time as final plat is approved and ready to go. And the purpose of that is in part now to provide access to the single family home, which will be coming down as a part of that third edition. Okay, so staff do recommend 2 different resolutions which would approve these vacation requests. The city did provide notices and public noticing as required by state statute for this process. So those 2 resolutions were provided to you in your packet, and there are 2 motions for those approvals should you decide to do so.
All right, very good. Thank you. At this time, I will open up the public hearing. Does anyone wish to speak to this item? Anyone wishing to speak to this item? And we have one more call, last call. Anyone wishing to speak to this item? Seeing no comments, I will now close the public hearing and open the floor for discussion from council. Council, is there any comments or questions on this
Just a
item?
clarification.
Councilmember Gunderson, please.
That roadway on the east side, that was just the roadway that we talked about for the family to get to the house that's existing and to leave again, right? That's the only reason that was left, so that they could access the home that they were living in before.
Right. My understanding, and Kara's nodding her head yes, so I feel even better now, is that was for access purposes.
There was no other planning purpose for that, right?
Very good. Any other questions? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Motion, move to adopt the resolution approving vacation of 1 easement for Brookmore third edition.
All right, we have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. I will entertain another motion, please.
Move to adopt the resolution approving vacation of 3 easements for Brookmore Second Edition.
I have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. There are no more items on our regular agenda, so we'll move on to reports and emerging issues. Attorney Vos, any reports from you?
Mayor, council, I do not. Thank you.
All right, very good. Ms. Hardy, anything from staff?
None from staff, Madam Mayor.
And council members, anything from council this evening?
Just kind of.
Councilmember Gunderson, please.
Just a little bit of levity, and I think Kara might laugh at me, but we really need to get a cricket soundtrack for when we have to ask for public feedback. We play walk-up music. I don't know why we wouldn't do that.
Very good. Duly noted. Any other comments from council? All right, with that, there are no more items to come before the body, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We stand adjourned.